Lena, after 22 years, we're sunsetting your entire division. Daniel said, his tone clinical, detached, as if he were reading off a checklist. Your final day will be Friday. I sat across from him in his corner office, the early spring skyline of Seattle casting soft shadows against the glass. The Space Needle loomed in the background, an ironic reminder of progress. This was my execution room, apparently. Daniel Norcross had been the new director of operations at Kaldrex Dynamics for just under 9 months. In that time, he'd methodically slashed budgets, shuffled teams, and now was wrapping up the hatchet job by outsourcing the applied systems division I had built from scratch. I swallowed hard, but kept my expression calm. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, voice even. Daniel's shoulders eased slightly. He was expecting resistance, maybe tears, maybe anger, but not grace. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and offered my hand. The handshake was brief. To him, it marked closure. To me, it was only the beginning. My name is Lena Morrissey. I'm 56 years old. And after over 2 decades designing precision automation systems for Caldrex, I was being dismissed like I never mattered. But they'd forgotten one thing. When I joined the company in 2002, we were operating out of a warehouse with patchy electricity and a fax machine that jammed every other page. It was Harold Bain, the original founder, who hired me. We can't offer much in salary, but we can offer something better, he said, ownership. So we struck a deal. In lieu of a competitive paycheck, I negotiated partial intellectual property rights on anything I developed solo. Harold signed the agreement himself. Over time, it was filed away, ignored by newer executives focused on quarterly wins. But I never forgot. As Caldrex grew, the patent portfolio expanded, but the core framework behind the AXS motion control line, which now powered nearly 45% of Caldrex's revenue, that patent remained in my name. Walking back through the department floor, 6 desks, 6 people, all notified that morning I passed my protege, Darren. He sat frozen disbelief on his face. They can't just replace you? He said, his voice low. They already did, I replied quietly. But what I didn't say, and what no one but my lawyer knew, was that the team they hired offshore wouldn't make it far. The minute they tried to adjust the architecture or push a firmware update, they'd hit a wall. Because without me, and without that agreement renewed, they were locked out of their own system. Friday would come soon enough, and when it did, they'd find out this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of theirs unraveling. As I quietly began packing up my desk that afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, Exit Documentation. Final review required. 16 weeks of severance for 22 years of service. That's what they thought my legacy was worth. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly anticipate, was that the real cost would come later. I stared at the half-empty cubicle I had called home since our earliest days. When I joined Kaldrex Dynamics in 2002, it was nothing more than 2 rented floors in an old shipping warehouse near Tacoma's industrial district. The heating rattled like a freight train, and the break room smelled perpetually of burnt coffee. Welcome aboard, Harold Bain had said on my first day, shaking my hand with the kind of optimism only startup founders possess. We can't pay much yet, but you'll own everything you build. Back then, it sounded more symbolic than practical. But Harold meant it literally. When I designed the original architecture for the AXS drive controller, our flagship motion automation product, the company was weeks away from shutting down. Instead of watching my creation be swallowed in a fire sale, Harold and I struck a deal. Caldrex would license the IP exclusively as long as I remained employed. But the patent ownership that stayed with me. It protects both of us, Harold had explained. The company gets stability. You get leverage. Years passed. Caldrex evolved from scrappy innovator to global supplier, and that little agreement got buried figuratively and literally. Harold retired in 2015. Each new leadership wave, including Daniel, seemed less connected to the company's founding DNA. For 22 years, I had been the engine behind our systems division, quietly creating, solving, mentoring. I wasn't flashy. I didn't need to be. My work was in 5 product lines and nearly 2/3 of Caldrex's revenue stream. But Daniel saw only columns on a spreadsheet, 6 employees with redundant roles and overmarket salaries. What his models missed was history, experience, ownership. The week after his announcement blurred into a haze of resignation, emails, awkward hallway nods, and HR packets. I met with each team member, privately offering references, contacts, and my full support. Darren choked up during our final lunch together. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, pushing his fries around his plate. I smiled, not bitterly, not angrily, just with quiet resolve. "I'm not finished yet," I said. "Sometimes the best advantage is being the one they forget to worry about." I didn't need to retaliate. I just needed to wait. Because as soon as they tried to update the AXS firmware or retool the design overseas, they'd run into something very real. A wall with my name on it. May mashni apapos amaze. Darren looked confused, almost hurt when I didn't answer his question directly, but I simply gave him a reassuring smile and walked away. Friday was coming fast, and with it a reckoning. That final morning, I arrived at the Caldrex campus just after 6:00 a.m. The halls were still dark, the only sound the low hum of the HVAC system and the echo of my steps on polished concrete. Security nodded me in. Without question, I had secured special access the week prior under the pretense of gathering personal effects from multiple testing sites. But I wasn't just collecting mementos. I was saying goodbye. The systems lab, tucked into the far west wing, had always been my domain. Some called it the nerve center of Caldrex's AXS product line. I called it home. Inside the original AXS prototype sat on display its metallic casing, a little worn now, but still elegant in its simplicity. I reached out and ran my fingers along its edge, recalling long nights fueled by caffeine and stubbornness. Next to it stood each generation of the platform AXS-2-3 and the current flagship, the AXS-300, all built on the same foundational code, all protected under my name. By 8:00 a.m., the building buzzed with quiet tension. A few colleagues stopped by my office, some to say goodbye, others just to look busy. My space was half-packed into cardboard boxes. 2 decades of contribution reduced to a few folders and desk plants. At 10:00 a.m., I gathered my team one last time. "It's been the honor of my career to work beside you," I told them, voice steady but tight. "Whatever comes next, never forget. We didn't just build products. We built trust. If you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, and if you're curious what happens next, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this journey of quiet strength, sharp strategy, and well-earned redemption." At noon, Sharp, Daniel's assistant, delivered my termination paperwork. She didn't meet my eyes. I signed everything without comment, handed over my badge, and stood up. By 2:00 p.m., I walked out of Caldrex's lobby for the last time, carrying one box and a plan that had already begun to move into place. That evening, I sat across from my attorney, Philip Grant. His desk was covered in documents, contracts, technical diagrams, and patent filings. "It's all clean," he said. "Patent rights are locked in. Licensing ends the moment your employment ends. And the consulting offer," I asked. He nodded. 5 times your salary exclusive licensing terms, veto authority over any design changes. It's firm. They won't like it, but they'll have no alternative." "How soon until they notice?" I asked. "Depends how fast they try to touch the code," Philip said. 2 weeks tops." I exhaled slowly. Relief, sadness, and something unexpected clarity. "Send the cease and desist." Monday, I told him, "but hold the proposal." That weekend, I replanted the front garden. Dug through old roots, made space for spring. On Sunday, I walked Discovery Park, watching gulls rise against the wind. By Monday morning, I drank my coffee in silence. No commute, no emails, no meetings. But the clock had started ticking. No early alarm, no emails, no sprint to the car with toast in hand. That Monday morning, I sipped my coffee slowly on the back deck, listening to birdsong instead of conference calls. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Philip sent the cease and desist letter to Caldrex's legal department, and with it, the countdown to chaos had begun. The first call came faster than expected, just 3 days later. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Lena." "This is Diane from legal at Caldrex," came the voice tight with discomfort. "We've received a letter from your attorney. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied evenly. "The patents for the AXS system architecture are filed under my name. The licensing agreement was valid only during my employment. As of last Friday, that agreement has ended." There was a pause long enough to feel deliberate. Then she cleared her throat. "Could we perhaps meet to discuss this in person?" "My attorney handles all communications now," I said. "I believe you already have his contact information." The next several days brought an escalating chain of phone calls from Diane to her supervisor, then to the chief technology officer himself. I didn't take any of them. I simply forwarded everything to Philip, who gave me the highlights in our Thursday check-in. "They're in full panic mode," he said with a chuckle. "Your licensing flags are firing every time their offshore team attempts a change. Development on the AXS 400 series is frozen. They can't update, can't modify, can't even test." I felt a pang of concern. Have they reached out to my old team? Word is they've tried, but most of them have already landed elsewhere. Darren just started at Endora Automation. Jessica. She's now with Navarro Systems as their lead controls specialist. That brought a real smile to my face. Navarro was one of Caldrex's top rivals, and Jessica would flourish there. 9 days after my exit, my phone buzzed again. I let it go to voicemail. "Lena? It's Daniel." His voice was tight. "We need to talk about the patent situation. It's causing serious operational disruption. Please call me back as soon as you can." I didn't call back. I forwarded the message to Philip with one note. Let them sit in it. 1 more week. I booked a cabin in Leavenworth and disappeared into pine-covered hills for a few days. I soaked in hot springs, breathed fresh mountain air, and read a novel for the first time in months. For the first time in years, my sleep was dreamless and deep. When I returned, I had 4 more messages from Daniel. The final one dropped all corporate polish. "Lena, please." The board's breathing down my neck. "We've had to halt 3 production lines. Whatever you want, we'll talk. Just, please call me." I didn't call. Not yet. The silence was doing the heavy lifting. "We've had to shut down 3 production lines." Daniel's final voicemail had said, desperation cracking through his tone. "Whatever you want, we'll discuss it. Just call me back." I didn't. Instead, I met with Philip the following morning in his downtown office where he gave me the real news. "Word got out," he said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Caldrex stock is down 12%. Analysts are asking questions." I scanned the headlines. "Caldrex halts flagship AXS development amidst internal disruption." An emergency board meeting had been scheduled for Friday. "It's time," I said. "Send them the consulting agreement." The terms weren't subtle. Exclusive licensing to my patents non-negotiable. Consulting services at 5 times my former salary. Final approval rights over any changes to the system. And full authority to train the new engineering team both in Seattle and overseas. I was drawing the blueprint for their recovery. On my terms. The next morning, my doorbell rang. Standing there was Daniel Norcross. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Suit-wrinkled eyes, red voice, hoarse. "Lena!" He started, his tone brittle. "The board removed me yesterday. I've been reassigned to regional sales. I wanted to say something before I leave Seattle." I didn't gloat. I didn't even flinch. I simply listened as he fumbled for some sense of resolution. "This wasn't personal," I finally said. "It was about honoring the value of what was built of what you couldn't see." He gave a small nod, eyes on the ground. "The new interim director wants to speak with you. Her name's Meredith Bain." I paused. "Harold's daughter." He nodded. Meredith Bain. That explained the sudden shift. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her sharp mind, her direct gaze. She hadn't followed her father into engineering. Instead, she had spent 2 decades as a consultant on clean energy systems across Europe. But she still held a significant share in Caldrex and a seat on the board. Later that afternoon, we met at a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market, neutral ground. I flew in from Copenhagen. As soon as the board briefed me, Meredith said, stirring her tea, "My father always said you were the soul of Caldrex innovation. I should have stayed more involved after he stepped down." "You couldn't have known what they were planning," I replied. "Well, now I do. And I've been authorized to resolve this completely. You've read the proposal." She nodded. The board approved it unanimously. I raised an eyebrow. That fast? Meredith smiled wryly. 3 production lines, frozen millions in losses by the day, and a furious shareholder base. They're highly motivated. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city bustle beyond the window. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't chasing respect. It was already in motion, coming back around on its own. "And Daniel's outsourcing decision?" I asked, watching Meredith over the rim of my coffee mug. Her expression darkened just slightly. "Being reevaluated?" she said. His approach was short-sighted at best. I nodded slowly. "The agreement I made with the board, it's not just about money. It's about honoring innovation and the people who actually build the future." "I understand that better than most," Meredith replied without hesitation. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a crisp folder. "Which is why I'm proposing something additional to the terms you already negotiated." She slid the document across the table. I opened it and scanned the first page, then looked up. "Director of Advanced Innovation Executive Committee seat." I blinked. Meredith gave a firm nod. "We need to rebuild Lena, not just restore function, but restore culture. Your patents are essential, but your vision is irreplaceable." Her tone didn't flatter. It respected. "We want you to lead a newly formed division focused entirely on future systems development. You'll have direct board access, full autonomy, and decision-making authority." I leaned back, studying her carefully. "What happens to the outsourced team?" "They'll remain in place for routine support maintenance and global implementation," she said. "But core innovation returns to Seattle, and you'll lead it." My thoughts drifted to Darren and Jessica, now thriving elsewhere. And to the younger engineers I hadn't had the chance to mentor yet. "I'll need a team," I said, "and competitive packages to bring in fresh talent." "You'll have full budget authority," Meredith replied. "The board already approved it. This isn't just a fix, it's a reset." We spent another hour reviewing structure, timelines, and priorities. When we finally stood to leave, I shook her hand and said, "I'll give it a final pass with my attorney, but in principle, you have my yes." That evening, I met with Philip at his office to review the offer line by line. He raised his eyebrows halfway through. "Lena, did you see this?" He pointed to a clause buried in the addendum. "This position includes equity, 5% ownership, vested immediately." I stared at him. 5%, he smiled. "That makes you one of Caldrex's largest individual shareholders. After how they pushed me out?" "Sometimes," he said, "the universe balances the books." The following Monday, I returned to the Caldrex building not as a discarded engineer, but as a board-level executive. The security guard, who once scanned my badge, now opened the elevator personally. Meredith had arranged a corner office on the top floor with a sweeping view of Elliott Bay and the city skyline. On the desk sat a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo, me and Harold Bain, circa 2004, beside the first AXCS prototype. A handwritten note was tucked behind the frame. "Dad always said you were the soul of this place. Now let's make it official." Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Jessica. "Heard you're back." "That true?" I smiled as I typed back, "Better than back." "How do you feel about Navarro Systems?" I texted Jessica versus a chance to help build something revolutionary. Her reply came less than a minute later. "For you, I'd give notice today." I smiled. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the biggest one hadn't yet revealed itself. 2 weeks into my new role as Director of Advanced Innovation, I exercised my board-level clearance to request access to Caldrex's internal financials, vendor relationships, and operational data from the past 5 years. Nothing was off-limits now. What I uncovered made the air in my lungs freeze. Daniel's outsourcing plan hadn't been some misguided solo efficiency play, it was part of something bigger. He had been coordinating with a private equity firm called Strathmore Capital, a group that had quietly begun acquiring Caldrex shares through shell companies just a few months after he arrived. Their playbook was textbook cut costs to inflate profitability on paper, pump up short-term value, then sell the shell of the company at a premium before anyone noticed the foundation was hollow. During an emergency board session the following day, I presented my findings in full. Daniel joined 9 months ago, I said, pointing to a slide. Within 3 months, Strathmore began accumulating shares. 5 months in, he proposed the outsourcing initiative despite our record-setting quarter. Meredith Bain leaned forward, her expression unreadable. You believe he was planted? I nodded. He was in communication with Strathmore executives before he even accepted the role. I tapped the screen again, bringing up internal emails. Every review, every budget adjustment, it was all reported back to them. Howard Lee, one of the board's longest-serving members, went pale. These holding patterns, they were building toward a controlling stake. If they had succeeded, I continued. Caldrex would have been gutted, its patents sold off to competitors, its staff eliminated, and its long-term value destroyed. Meredith's jaw tightened. They failed because your patents weren't part of the company's assets. They never discovered that in their due diligence, I confirmed. The weight of how close we had come to losing everything settled over the room like fog. If I hadn't retained those IP rights, I said quietly, Daniel's plan would have worked. My termination was just the first step. Meredith stood. We need to move now. Howard, initiate a shareholder rights plan. Lena, work with legal to lock down every remaining piece of proprietary technology. I want a full report on my desk by morning. After the meeting, Meredith asked me to stay back. You've saved this company twice, she said, softer now. Once, when you built the technology that carried us, and now, by unearthing the truth behind this. I shook my head. Your father saved it when he chose to protect the people behind the products. The patent agreement was his idea, not mine. She gave a faint smile. And still, the most forward-thinking thing we've ever done. He always said the same about you, Meredith said with a small smile, that his smartest move was protecting your innovations, no matter how many people called it foolish. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. We launched a defensive strategy to block Strathmore Capital from gaining further influence, including a shareholder rights plan that would automatically dilute any hostile attempt to seize control. Daniel's contract was formally terminated for breach of fiduciary duty. The board submitted our internal findings along with email evidence directly to the SEC for investigation. But what brought me the most satisfaction wasn't Daniel's removal. It was rebuilding what he tried to dismantle. Jessica returned as Deputy Director of Advanced Innovation, and she brought 2 of our original engineers back with her. Together, we began drafting a roadmap for a new generation of adaptive motion systems, far beyond anything Caldrex had ever developed. Our current flagship systems would look outdated by comparison. Then one afternoon, an envelope appeared on my desk. It was an invitation handwritten to visit Harold Bain at his lakeside home near Lake Chelan. I hadn't seen Harold in nearly a decade. His health had declined, but his wit hadn't dulled one bit. I always knew they'd underestimate you, he said as we sat outside, a warm mug of herbal tea in his weathered hands. Quiet brilliance is invisible to people who only value noise. I smiled. You taught me that. He leaned in slightly, a familiar twinkle in his eyes. Want to hear the best part of this whole saga? Absolutely. There's one more patent, he said. The most important one. And they never found it. That sentence launched a week-long search through historical records, buried filings, and old holding company agreements. With Philip's help, I verified it. Harold was right. Filed under Transcendent Engineering Solutions, a dormant holding entity co-owned by Harold and me, was a master patent covering a proprietary adaptive learning framework. This wasn't just an enhancement. It was the conceptual backbone behind every intelligent control system we'd ever produced. It extended the protections of our existing IP portfolio by decades, and best of all, it existed completely outside the scope of my employment with Caldrex. This patent is a failsafe, I explained to Meredith after confirming the ownership records. If Caldrex ever faced a real existential threat, this could stop it or save it. And Strathmore never uncovered it in their due diligence. Meredith said, eyes widening. Even if they'd gained full control, they still wouldn't have had this. The timing couldn't have been better. Despite our internal blockades, Strathmore had quietly amassed enough shares to demand a seat at the board table. Their representative, a slick man named Maxwell Reed, arrived at headquarters for his first meeting. "I'm here to modernize operations," he announced confidently. "Caldrex has potential. It's just been trapped in traditional thinking." Meredith and I exchanged a glance, silent, sharp. He had no idea what was coming. "We're always open to fresh perspectives," Mr. Reed, Meredith said, her tone crisp but composed. "In fact, we have an important announcement today regarding our intellectual property portfolio." She nodded toward me. I stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. "This is our master patent filed years before any current product was developed. As of this morning, full licensing rights have been transferred back to Caldrex in exchange for guarantees that protect the future of our innovation division." Maxwell Reed took the folder with practiced indifference, but as he flipped through the pages, his composure cracked. His confident smirk faded. The color drained from his face. "This covers—" he began, voice uneven. "Yes," I said calmly, "everything." What followed in the weeks after was swift and decisive. The master patent rendered Strathmore Capital's acquisition strategy useless. Without access to the adaptive learning framework, they were left holding shares in a company they could no longer manipulate. Their exit was quiet, but costly. Reports later confirmed they sold off their stake at a substantial loss. Reed resigned from the board after only 2 meetings. Word around the industry was that he had been asked to step down from Strathmore as well. Turns out failure has a price tag even at the top. With the external threat neutralized, we turned our attention inward. Jessica and I led a company-wide audit of Caldrex's innovation pipeline. We identified weak spots, delayed projects, and opportunities that had been overlooked during the chaos. Our team, now a mix of trusted veterans and fresh engineers with bold ideas, began work on prototypes that would redefine motion control technology over the next decade. But perhaps the most meaningful change came in the form of policy. We introduced a new intellectual property initiative. Engineers who developed patentable systems or processes would retain partial ownership, while Caldrex would hold exclusive licensing rights. Meredith dubbed it the Morrissey model. And within weeks, it was being studied by other firms as a model for innovation equity. "Innovation thrives when the people behind it have skin in the game," I said during the all-hands meeting that announced the change. "This isn't just about patents, it's about respect." Vanessa Moore, who stepped in to replace Daniel as Chief Operations Officer, embraced the new approach fully. Unlike Daniel, she had both engineering roots and leadership experience. She understood the value of institutional knowledge and long-term investment in people. "I wish I could see Daniel's face when he hears what happened," Jessica said one afternoon, grinning as we sketched out a new prototype. "I don't," I replied, honestly. This was never about revenge. It was about honoring what's real. Meredith, passing by, paused with a nod. "And that's why you belong in that director's chair." "Lena?" Balance had returned. The seeds I planted over 2 decades had matured into something resilient, not just protecting me, but protecting every builder, every thinker, every quiet force at Caldrex who dared to create. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. I didn't share it for applause. I shared it because too many people like me, people who build in silence, who innovate without demanding the spotlight, are pushed aside when the winds of change blow through a company boardroom. But we are not disposable. We are the foundation. If Lena's journey reminded you of your own, of a time when your experience was overlooked, when your voice was ignored, or when someone mistook your quiet strength for weakness, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Share your story. Let others know that dignity, experience, and integrity still matter. And if you know someone who's in the middle of their own storm, send them this. Sometimes all it takes is one example to remind someone they're not alone, and that being underestimated is often a setup for something far greater. Here's my advice. Protect your work, Know your worth. Play the long game. Your value isn't measured by how loudly you speak or how many people know your name. It's measured in the systems that still run years after you're gone, in the people you've mentored who rise up, and in the quiet safeguards you built while no one was watching. Let's keep this conversation going. I'm not done building, and maybe you aren't either.